sometimes the same message needs to be repeated again and again and again, particularly because we're so bombarded with information today that we need to hear it multiple ways, multiple times, and through multiple different channels, often in order for it to sink in. And while I'm talking about clarity and consistency, I'm just going to talk about email for a minute. Email is not a communication tool. It is an information tool. Do not think just because you have sent an email to somebody that they have received it, because often they will not have.
Hi and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. This is your host Anushka at peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel, which receives more than 400,000 visitors a year, and we also publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month. We have with us today Mel Kettle. Mel is a communication strategist at Mel Kettle Associates. As a speaker, mentor, trainer, and facilitator, she works mostly with for-purpose organizations with the occasional for-profit thrown for some variety. She especially loves working with CEOs, boards, and other leaders in associations, research centers, charities, and universities to help them really improve their communication, engagement, and social media skills so that they can better interact, read, and engage with their audience. Mel supports the ideologies of real connection and sustained engagement. With more than 2 decades of experience in strategic communication and leadership and a unique educational combination of a master's of business and marketing and a master of public health, her clients say she's a valuable asset to leaders and teams that really want to achieve real connection and sustain engagement. Mel is also passionate about helping women and organizations better understand the real impact of menopause at the workplace. And a lot more. We really can't wait to dive deeper into the topics of her expertise. So welcome, Mel, and we're really thrilled to be having you at Leaders Hum today.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Likewise, the pleasure is absolutely ours. So diving right deep into the interview, Mel, the first question I really had for you was, can you tell us a little bit about how Mel Kettle Associates really came to be, the ideology and the great work that you do there?
So I started my consulting practice in 2006. And before that, at the beginning of my career, I was organising conferences mostly for associations and non-profits with a small conference communication company. So I was really in the thick of doing everything to do with event management and conference organising. But that was a great job at the time, but organising events is really stressful and exhausting. And so I burnt out after about 4 years of doing that. I also then moved from Sydney to Brisbane in 2000. So I can't believe it's been 21 years. It doesn't feel like that long. And was fortunate to get an amazing job with the Brisbane Festival, which is a huge performing arts festival in Australia every year. So I ran the marketing for that for a year. Then I worked in the Queensland state government doing various senior communications roles. And then after a while, I just thought there has to be more to life than going to work every day, doing 5 days of work a week, working for other people, not really doing work I loved, not really working with people I loved. And so I took the plunge and quit and decided to start consulting. And that was in July 2006. And I've loved every minute of working for myself since. So when I first started, I was doing a lot of very operational communication. So writing lots of annual reports, lots of copywriting, a little bit of strategy work. And then that morphed over time. And today, the majority of the work I do is working with senior leaders, teams, and organizations to help them understand how to communicate with more impact so that they develop real connection and sustained engagement. And I love the work I do. As you mentioned, I'm so committed to working with people to help them communicate more effectively so that they can, really have strong relationships with the people they're wanting to have relationships with.
Absolutely. Firstly, congratulations on the success of Mel Kettle Associates. That's some
Thank
wonderful
you.
work you're doing there, Mel. And it's really lovely to see how you kind of converted your passion into profession, and you're really doing something that you love, and you found your purpose at the end of it. And I think that's really what matters, right?
Oh, I absolutely agree. If you don't have, if your personal purpose doesn't align with your work purpose, I think it must be really conflicting for people to know which direction to go in. And that's something that I was really fortunate growing up. My parents instilled in my brother and I that the most important things that you do in life, you need to love. And that includes work. And I remember dad said to me, especially, if you don't love the work you do, then find something else to do because we spend so much of our lives working. It seems a shame to not love it. And I do acknowledge that I'm very fortunate to love what I do, but I've also worked really hard so that I can love what I do.
Wow, very well said. I completely agree with you on how the purpose really matters over profit and the paycheck, right? Um,
For me, it definitely, but not everybody's in that position.
right.
There's certainly been periods of my life where I've had to make work related decisions based on money. And, I haven't loved those clients or those jobs, but I had to pay the mortgage and I had to buy groceries and I had financial commitments that I couldn't get out of. So sometimes money has to take precedence. And I think if you find yourself in a job where that you're doing purely because you need the money, then you really need to make sure you've got something else in life that you love and that you get to do because you love it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really heartening to see that you're focusing on communication and better engagement and fostering better interpersonal connection, especially at a trying time like this, right? When all we need is the human touch most.
It, COVID has certainly been interesting from a communication perspective. One of the things that I talk to a lot of my clients about is how do you become better leaders through communication? And, Richard Branson said communication is the most important skill a leader can have. I sometimes think there's leaders that need to hear that more than others. But I also get asked, well, how do I become a better communicator? And I think there's three really, I like to say simple things you can do, but they're not always simple. And it's asking the right questions is the first one. Knowing how to ask questions so that you show interest and curiosity and not judgment is so important. The second thing is, how do you listen? People today, so many people don't listen to what they're being told. We ask a question, how are you? And the automatic response is busy. And then you move on. And so many times I've been asked that question and I've, tried to go into detail using words other than busy. And the person who's asked it has just tuned out. So think through, how do you listen properly? What do you do to listen? How do you listen not just with your ears, but with your eyes as well? Which comes to the third thing of, what are you observing? How do you observe people and their behaviors and their body language and what they're doing when they're not speaking? And that's one of the things that I think has been the most difficult with COVID is we communicate so much more and we're engaging so much more through a screen like we are on this Zoom call. And it's really difficult to listen and observe when you're on Zoom. And it's hard to ask the right questions as well, because it's hard to feel empathy through a screen, and it's hard to demonstrate love and care and compassion through a screen compared to when you're in the same room as somebody. But I think that the COVID isn't going away anytime soon, and we need to work out, how do we adapt to this new way or this different way of communicating with people so that they still feel loved, trusted, and valued.
Absolutely. Can't second you more on this one, Mel. And that was really enlightening, the three aspects of communication. So it's asking the right questions, practicing active listening, and observing right? So
Yeah.
that was great. I mean, you kind of encapsulated the whole communication part of the interpersonal touch and, just fostering better human connect really succinctly. So thank you for that. So just going on to the next question, Mel, as a communication expert, do you think we've really grown to not value real connection at the workplace? And again, this is almost like a follow-up question. So how would you really put this in light of the pandemic?
I think I'm an optimist, and I like to think that we haven't stopped valuing real connection, but I think we've forgotten what it is. And I think one of the reasons we've forgotten what it is because we all spend so much time staring at a screen, staring at our phone, which I'm holding up for those of you who are listening. And when we are in meetings, or when we are in the office, or now with so many of us are working from home, it's so easy to be distracted by a screen, whether it's your phone, a tablet, a laptop, Netflix on your TV. And research in Australia shows that we spend 12 hours a day staring at a screen, and between 4 and 5 hours of that is looking at our phone. So when we're spending all of that time glued to technology, it shouldn't be surprising that the interpersonal or the human-to-human connection is pushed aside, because there's not that much time left for it. And so I think that we need to rethink, how do we communicate and connect and engage with people? It's really easy to send a text message or to send an email, but instead let's just pick up the phone and maybe have a conversation. And I remember I was talking to a client about 2 years ago, and quite a few of her team worked remotely at that time, so quite a while before COVID. And I said to her, you need to make sure you stay engaged with your team. Use video, call them on FaceTime, do some Zoom meetings when you have your one-on-ones rather than always on the phone, so you can actually see each other. Now I'm saying to that same client and others, everybody is so Zoom fatigued, pick up the phone and just have an audio conversation and forget the video camera. And it's funny how it's just come full circle in not a very long period of time. But to answer your question, I think we've forgotten. And I think we've forgotten. I don't think we've forgotten that connection is important. I think we've forgotten how to connect when we're not in the same room as each other.
Right, absolutely. Completely agree with you. And I think now from regarding more virtual inclusivity programs that organizations are really looking at, so that people coming from diverse backgrounds really feel included, even though they're working remotely. I think that's really catching on, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's really important to remember that when we are working from home, we're at home, and home is different for everyone. When we go into the office, we all have a very similar experience because we're in the same office. We usually have the same equipment provided to us to do our jobs. But when we're at home, some of us have kids, some of us don't. Some of us have kids we have to educate and, make sure they go to school at home through their school screens. Some of us have partners who are also working from home. Some of us live in 2-room apartments and have to have all of us working from the kitchen table at the same time. Some of us live in large houses with big outdoor spaces, so we can go outside, we can get fresh air, we can exercise on our property, and we might have our own office. And I think it's so important that you remember the physical environment is different, but also the mental and the emotional environments that people are working from at home is different. Some people live alone. Some people live with their parents. Some people are in relationships that are breaking down and that were breaking down before COVID. And the stress and the tension of being at home all the time in a lockdown situation is just making that relationship untenable. Some people live in domestic violence situations. So, it comes back to knowing your people, knowing who make up your workforce, and having as strong a relationship as you possibly can with each individual who you work with, so that you've got that strong bond of connection with them. one of my clients was saying to me early in COVID, probably in about April, she said, one of my staff is just not doing his job well, and he was an absolute gun in the office, which means he was just amazing, always on time, really productive, achieved all of his goals and KPIs, but at home he's just not performing. And I said to her, have you asked him what his home environment is like? And she looked at me and said, no. And I said, well, his home environment might not be conducive to doing a good job, and plus he might not enjoy not having the camaraderie of the people around him also working. And so she rang me a week later and said, oh, you're so right. He's at home. He had just moved into an apartment with his partner. It's a 1-bedroom apartment. It's not very big. They've got a new puppy. It's a new relationship. His partner's working from home as well. And he's just really struggling to focus. And again, that comes back down to asking, listening, and observing. And she hadn't been able to observe anything through Zoom because all she could see was a plain blank wall behind him when he was on the phone to her. But by asking questions and, observing his behavior and listening to his answers gave her the insights that she needed to be able to change the way she managed him. And it made a huge difference to both of them.
Very well said, and that was a very relevant example that you provided our audience to relate with, Mel, and completely agree with you on how we really need to empathize with our employees more and kind of be responsive to each one's subjectives, right?
Absolutely, and not just with the people who report to you, but we need to manage up as well. And, we need to show equal care and empathy for our leaders and our senior leadership team. I do a lot of work with CEOs. I do a lot of mentoring and coaching, and the common conversation I have with almost all of them is that they're really lonely. They're lonely in their job. They are lonely at work. They're particularly lonely because of COVID, especially for those who live alone, and they don't really have anyone to talk to. They can't talk to their board because their board is responsible for hiring and firing, and they don't want to put their job at risk. They can't talk to their staff about it because they're the boss and they're meant to have all the answers, even though, they normally don't, but they don't want to show weakness to their staff. And in many cases, they can talk to their partners about it, but if their partner hasn't had an equivalent job or an equivalent position of responsibility, then chances are they're not going to understand what that loneliness is like when you're in a senior leadership role. And so I think the more as individuals and as humans and as general people at work, the more that we can ask, listen, and observe the people who we report to and who are more senior to us, the more they'll feel understood as well. And, trust and connection and understanding, it's all a two-way street. It doesn't just flow one way, it has to flow both ways. And so the more that you can do to strengthen those bonds with people at all levels of your organization, the better off the better position that will put you in.
Absolutely. And I think, as you mentioned, it's okay to feel vulnerable at such a time. And it's okay to recognize the fact that everyone's going through something and we're really not alone in this, right?
Absolutely. I love Brene Brown, and I love her podcast, Unlocking Us. And I remember listening to the first episode of it, probably in April last year. And she talks about the FFTs. Mm-hmm. And the FFTs are the F word, first times. And if it was my podcast, I'd say that word, but I don't know what your language warning is like, so I won't, but leave it to your imagination. And she says, whenever we do anything for the first time, it's hard and we feel scared and anxious and confused and worried. And whether that first time is the first time you get behind the steering wheel of a car, or the first time you go on a date with that gorgeous person you've got a crush on, or the first time you get on a Zoom call or speak at an event, or the first time you go through a global pandemic. We all deal with these FFTs. And so it doesn't matter who you are or what your position in the organization is or in society, whether you're the president or the prime minister or the garbage collector. We all have first times of everything because that's what life is. And so the more we can remember that other people share our uncertainty and our fear, that can only help strengthen those connections.
Absolutely, absolutely. That was a very enlightening response you provided us with, Mel. I'm so thankful to engage in this deep conversation with you. So many lovely insights from your end.
Thank you.
So, just going on to the next question, if you were to really guide leaders to practice certain simple steps to kind of build trust and communication at the workplace, what would they really be?
I think there's 3 things that we need to do when we communicate. We need to communicate with clarity. And by that, I mean, be really clear in what it is you're asking people to do or telling people to do, and be clear in terms of the language you use, the way you say it. Don't be ambiguous. Don't use jargon or language that people might not understand. If you can, use stories or data to back up what you're saying so that people can be more inclined to understand. Show compassion. I think compassion is something that we need even more going through, a global pandemic. So some people are finding things easier. Some people are finding things harder. We're all individuals. Turn on that empathy button and dial it up. So the more we can dial up compassion and empathy, I think the more that people will be inclined to do what you want them to do. And then the third thing is communicate with consistency. Communicate across the different communication channels that you use consistently. Make sure your message is consistent. Try not to be ambiguous, and repeat it often. One of my clients, we were having a conversation about transitioning back into the office, and he said, nobody in my organisation is worried about it. And I said, really? You've got 500 staff. I don't quite believe nobody's worried about it. And he said, we asked them 3 months ago and they were happy to come back. And I said, that was 3 months ago. Have you asked them again? He said, oh no, I thought asking them once would be enough. So it was a good reminder for him that sometimes the same message needs to be repeated again and again and again, particularly because we're so bombarded with information today that we need to hear it multiple ways, multiple times, and through multiple different channels, often in order for it to sink in. And while I'm talking about clarity and consistency, I'm just going to talk about email for a minute. Email is not a communication tool. It is an information tool. Do not think just because you have sent an email to somebody that they have received it, because often they will not have. So, use email, with caution, and don't use it as your primary source of communication to people, because it's too easy for messages to be missed or misunderstood.
Absolutely. That was great. So it's all about the 3 C's, right? Clarity, compassion, and consistency, right?
Exactly.
And that was wonderful, especially when you provided that little anecdote about how you constantly need to get in touch with your people and know what they're really feeling like, especially at a time when, change is happening at a really fast pace and we need to kind of adapt and be agile to changing situations, right?
Absolutely, we do. And I think adaptation, that's key. And we all need to be adapting with how we work, how we live, and how we communicate.
Absolutely. So, Mel, also the 4th question I had for you is, have you seen the concept of communication and transparency between teams change over the years?
Yes, I think it has changed. And I think it's changed because people today have a far greater expectation that organisations are transparent in their dealings. There's an expectation that not only are organisations more transparent, but that they have accountability and they take responsibility when things go wrong. And we need to remember that the way we trust is changing. And if you are transparent and accountable in your dealings with the people in your business orbit, then trust will be more forthcoming. The other thing I think that's really important is when you don't know the answer to something, say that you don't know the answer. I was watching a media conference this morning with our Premier and our Chief Health Officer. And one of the things that I was really impressed with was the Chief Health Officer, Dr. Jeanette Young, said a couple of times, "I'm not sure, I'll get back to you." And I was really impressed with that, because it takes a strong person to admit that they don't know the answer to something. And I think we need to remember that not knowing the answer to something is not a sign of weakness. It's something that can help you earn trust when you admit that you don't know, rather than making something up that can prove to be wrong. So I think that when it comes to communication and transparency between teams, it's really important that as leaders and as people in organizations broadly, that we're as transparent as possible. And whether that's, one of your staff asking you a question you don't know the answer to, or your boss asking you to do something and you don't know how. I used to say to my staff, if I trust you to do your job, but if you don't know how to do something, or if you have any questions, please ask me. No question is too small or too silly. I would rather you ask me the question than guess and get it wrong, which can cost time and money. So I really think that it's important to encourage that transparency, particularly also, we live in the digital world, and if you make a mistake, it can go viral on social media just like that. So the more that you are honest, yes, it might still go viral, but you'll be held up for, doing the right thing rather than trying to hide something.
Absolutely. So it's basically just having your values in place, right? Whether it's honesty, integrity, transparency, or accountability, as you mentioned. And it's okay to not know the answers to everything. And I think that also kind of keeps the wheel of curiosity rolling. We tend to go out of our comfort zones and seek answers to questions we don't really know about. So
I love that, the wheel of curiosity. I'm going to use that with accreditation to you, of course. But I think that's so important. And I think people are not curious enough. When we're children, we ask hundreds of questions a day. Toddlers ask why all the time. And I think as adults, we need to be asking why a lot more. Why is this acceptable? Why? And what can you do about it? And how do we do something about it? And not even the why question, but asking for clarification when we don't understand things, or, we've forgotten how to be curious, I think.
Very true, very true. So, Mel, I really don't want to end this interview, but just to kind of wrap it up, do you have any quote that really best describes your feelings about the future of work, workplace, and you?
I absolutely do. This is my favorite quote by Maya Angelou, and I'll read it. Maya Angelou says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And I think if we can live that, embody that quote, and embrace making people feel better and making people feel good about themselves and making people feel valued. And it's not about making people feel good about themselves when they've done the wrong thing. It's about showing empathy and care and compassion and communicating with clarity and consistency. One of my mentors says, "A confused mind says no." And so the more we can communicate in ways that let our minds say yes, the better off we'll all be.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can't agree more with you. And that was such a positive and lovely note to end the whole interview on, Mel. Thank you so much for taking out the time. I really appreciate it. And I had a wonderful time interviewing you today.
Oh, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation as well, and I look forward to listening to it back.
Yes, likewise. We shall surely stay in touch, and you take care and have a healthy time ahead of you.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.